Welcome back, everyone, to Here Today, Gone Tomorrow.
Yes, welcome back.
You know, usually we dive into all those pop culture things, that kind of faded away.
Right, the one-hit wonders,
Exactly.
the flashes in the pan.
Yeah, but today we're switching it up a little bit.
We are, yeah. This is a special edition for sure.
Yeah, so we're looking at Joker, Folie.
Yeah.
And it's weird because this movie had so much hype,
Oh, yeah. Tons of it.
and then it just disappeared.
It really did.
It was like, poof.
Like, where'd it go? The internet was practically on fire with theories and speculation.
It felt like the whole world was waiting with bated breath to see what they'd do after the first movie.
For sure. And, going from Oscar buzz to whatever this is, it's an interesting journey, to say the least.
It definitely got people talking, that's for sure. Speaking of we live in a society, well, society had a lot of thoughts on this one.
And they weren't shy about sharing them.
Not one bit. So we've got a ton of stuff to dig into today. Reviews, box office numbers, even some YouTube commentary. It paints a pretty fascinating picture of how this movie went from phenomenon to, well, something else entirely.
Yeah, I'd say fascinating is a good word for it. To really get into it, though, I think we need to start by going back to the beginning.
Okay, rewind time. Back to the OG Joker.
Exactly. That first movie wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural earthquake. Awards, box office records, the whole 9 yards. It set a ridiculously high bar for any sequel.
Oh yeah, talk about pressure. Imagine trying to follow up a billion-dollar Oscar-winning masterpiece.
It was a tall order for the filmmakers, that's for sure. And I think we have to acknowledge that when we're looking at the hype surrounding this sequel.
So let's talk hype. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first spark was Lady Gaga's casting as Harley Quinn. I mean, come on, she's a force of nature.
QGE casting. And then on top of that, they announced a whole album release tied to the movie. It was like they were saying, hey, this is going to be a musical experience.
Totally. They were all in on the music right from the start, which was a bold choice, to say the least, especially for a franchise known for its dark, gritty tone.
Yeah, it's like they took a hard left turn into a whole different genre.
The trailers and posters definitely played into that mystery, too. Lots of intrigue, visual metaphors, whispers of something totally unique.
And the internet, of course, went wild. I mean, It was all anyone could talk about for months.
And then the reviews dropped.
Dun, 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 dun.
And they were. Well, let's just say mixed is putting it lightly. Some folks loved it, praised the ambition, the originality.
But a lot of folks were left not so happy.
Some even called it a straight-up flop. Ouch.
Like the Yellow Times, they didn't pull any punches. They called it a box office flop and just ripped into the musical elements.
They pretty much questioned whether it even qualified as a musical at all.
Yikes. But, it's interesting how polarizing that musical aspect was. You have reviewers slamming it as a total misstep, and then YouTubers, like Charlie from Emergency Awesome, saying if you're a Gaga fan, you might actually enjoy it.
It really highlights how personal taste and expectations play into how we view a movie, doesn't it?
Big time. So we've got critics confused, fans either over the moon or throwing shade. But what about the cold, hard numbers? How did Folie actually do at the box office?
Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly the billion-dollar behemoth its predecessor was. The opening weekend domestically came in at, drumroll please, a measly $37.7 million.
Hold on. $37.7 million is measly.
Compared to the first Joker's opening weekend of $96.2 million. Yeah, it's a pretty big drop.
Ouch, that's gotta sting. So what was the final damage?
Reports say it just barely scraped past its production budget, landing somewhere around $200 million globally.
So not a total disaster, but not the triumph everyone was expecting either.
Not even close.
All right, so the million-dollar question. What happened? How did Folie fall so flat when the first movie was such a smash hit? What do you think were the biggest factors at play?
Well, there are a few things to consider, I think. And the most obvious one is, well, the expectations. That first movie set a bar that's pretty much impossible to reach.
Like trying to win the lottery twice in a row.
Sequels are always a gamble, but especially when the original was such a phenomenon.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, the musical format. Was that really the nail in the coffin, or is there more to it?
That's a big question. I think we need to dig a little deeper into why the musical format was such a divisive choice for this particular story.
Yeah, please. I'm dying to know what they were thinking. It just feels so jarring compared to the gritty, realistic feel of the first movie.
Right. Think about what made Joker so captivating. The psychological depth, the raw portrayal of mental illness, the realistic aesthetic. Now imagine trying to shoehorn big, flashy musical numbers into that world.
Yeah, it's like trying to mix oil and water.
Exactly. You've got this dark, intense character study, and then suddenly everyone's singing and dancing. It's a huge tonal shift that probably alienated a lot of fans who were expecting more of the same.
And don't forget, the first film had this almost documentary-like feel, very grounded, very real. Musicals, on the other hand, are usually more stylized, more fantastical.
Exactly. So the musical format might have actually worked against the very realism that drew people to Joker in the first place.
So it's not just that there's music, but the kind of musical experience they were going for.
Right. And if we look at what our YouTube expert Charlie had to say,
Charlie, our resident Gaga superfan.
he actually argued that the musical numbers themselves weren't bad. He even liked the soundtrack, which, for a Gaga fan, isn't a huge surprise.
Lady Gaga can definitely belt it out.
But even Charlie admitted that the musical format probably turned off some of the hardcore fans who loved that dark, gritty realism of the first Joker.
It's like they were trying to please two completely different audiences.
Yeah.
The art house crowd who like experimental filmmaking, and the comic book fans who love this psychological thriller aspect of the first one.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another factor in the film's reception. The critics.
Ah, the critics.
Hmm.
Love them or hate them, they have a voice.
And it's a voice that can influence how people perceive a movie. And in this case, those mixed reviews probably contributed to some audience hesitation.
Word of mouth is a powerful thing, especially when it's negative.
Exactly. So we've got sky-high expectations, a risky genre shift, and mixed reviews. It's starting to feel like Folie Deux was facing an uphill battle from the get-go.
It's like they were swimming upstream against a current of doubt.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to consider, and it might be the most telling sign that the studio didn't have a ton of faith in the film's success.
Okay, I'm all ears.
The movie was released digitally just 25 days after its theatrical debut.
Wait, 25 days? That's super fast.
It is, and in the movie world, a short theatrical window like that usually means the studio's trying to cut their losses.
So they knew it wasn't going to be a box office smash and wanted to get it onto streaming platforms ASAP.
Pretty much. It suggests a lack of confidence in the film's ability to hold its own in theaters.
So we've got high expectations, a risky genre switch, mixed reviews, and a short theatrical window. It's starting to look like death by a thousand cuts.
It does, doesn't it? But before we write it off entirely, I think it's worth diving deeper into some of those criticisms of the musical format. Were they valid? Or were people missing the point?
Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. But first, we want to hear from you. What were your first impressions of Joker? Folie Deux. Were you on board with the musical thing, or were you skeptical from the start? Head over to our website and let us know. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into this fascinating, if slightly bewildering, film. Don't go anywhere. All right, so we were in the middle of this whole musical controversy, right? Like, it wasn't just people hating musicals in general, it seems like.
No, definitely not. It was more nuanced than that. A lot of the criticisms focused on how the music was actually USED in the film. Like, did it really serve the story?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, was it actually moving the plot forward, or was it just kind of there?
The LA Times review, for instance, argued that the songs felt more like they were just dropped in for atmosphere, almost like a playlist someone put together.
Instead of being, integral to the storytelling.
Right, like a real musical where the songs are basically driving the plot and revealing character.
And they weren't too kind to Joaquin Phoenix's singing either, were they?
Nope. They actually compared it to his performance in Walk the Line, which is, well, a tough act to follow. I mean, he played Johnny Cash.
Talk about setting the bar high. Maybe they should have just, given him some auto-tune magic. Just kidding, of course.
But Lady Gaga herself actually said they were intentionally going for a more raw vocal style.
So maybe it wasn't about hitting those perfect high notes, but more about conveying a certain raw emotion.
That's one way to look at it. But the LA Times also criticized how some of the musical numbers were abruptly cut short. Like they were building to something and then, bam, it just stops.
Yeah, I remember feeling that too. It was definitely jarring, like someone hit the pause button at the worst possible moment.
The reviewer speculated that maybe they were trying to keep the runtime down, but it just ended up feeling kind of messy.
Yeah, not very satisfying. So it's this weird mix of intentionality on one hand and then execution and audience reaction on the other. And then you've got Gaga releasing their whole Harlequin album covering songs from the movie.
Right. It adds this whole other layer to the conversation. Is it a commentary on how the music was used in the film, or is it just an extension of the Joker world?
It's almost like she's reclaiming those musical moments on her own terms, separate from the film itself. And it goes back to that idea of subverting expectations.
Absolutely. It seems like Todd Phillips was really trying to break free from the typical comic book movie mold.
Yeah, like you were saying, I'm not going to play by the rules. I'm going to do my own thing.
And some critics pointed out how Lady Gaga's Harley Quinn felt like the complete opposite of Margot Robbie's version, which was much more in line with the traditional comic book portrayal.
It's like Phillips was giving the middle finger to the whole superhero movie machine.
Maybe? He even said in interviews that he wanted his Harley Quinn to be completely different from anything we'd seen before.
And he definitely achieved that, whether people liked it or not. So we've got this whole musical debate, but what about some of the other reasons the movie might have underperformed?
Yeah, it's important to remember that Folie wasn't released in a vacuum. There were other movies out there competing for attention.
Competition is brutal, especially when you've got big blockbusters all vying for the same audience.
And we can't forget about sequel fatigue. I mean, how many sequels, prequels, reboots are audiences supposed to keep up with? It's a lot.
It's like we're drowning in franchises. After a while, you just get tired of it all.
Right, and that fatigue can lead to a sense of apathy, even for movies that were highly anticipated.
So maybe all that hype for Folie Deux actually backfired in the end.
It's possible. When expectations are that high, it's almost inevitable that some people will be disappointed.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Right. And Folie had a lot to live up to. That first Joker movie was such a cultural phenomenon that it cast a long shadow over the sequel.
Yeah, it's like trying to follow in the footsteps of a legend.
Speaking of legends, we can't forget about the legacy of the Joker character itself.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about all the iconic Jokers we've had over the years. Heath Ledger, Jack Nicholson, Joaquin Phoenix in the first film.
It's a lot of baggage for any new interpretation to carry.
Yeah, it's almost like the Joker's become this cultural icon, and any attempt to reimagine him is going to be met with a lot of scrutiny.
So maybe the biggest challenge Folie faced wasn't the musical format, the critics, or even the box office.
But the fact that it was trying to follow in the footsteps of a giant.
A giant that had already captured the world's imagination.
Whoa, that got deep. So maybe it was just too much to ask Folie Deux to break free from that legacy and forge its own path.
It's definitely a complex issue. But before we move on, let's talk about one of the most talked about aspects of the film, Harley Quinn.
Yes. Lady Gaga's portrayal was definitely different from what we've seen before. Usually, Harley's this bubbly, chaotic energy, almost like a cartoon character come to life.
Right, but Gaga's Harley had a different vibe.
Totally. There was still that mischievous glint in her eye, but there was also a darkness, a complexity to her performance that felt really fresh.
It goes back to what we were saying about Phillips wanting to move away from that traditional comic book portrayal and create something unique.
And he did.
Yeah.
Whether you liked it or not, Gaga's Harley was definitely memorable.
Speaking of memorable, we have to talk about that ending.
Oh yeah, that ending.
Our YouTube expert, Charlie, called it bizarre and even joked that it felt like it was written by a random Twitter user.
I can see why he said that. It was definitely a twist that left you going, wait, what just happened? What does it all mean?
We don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, but it was, let's just say it was thought-provoking.
And definitely unsettling. Like
Okay.
it left you with more questions than answers.
Which, in a way, might be the real success of Folie Deux. It's a movie that sparks conversation, even if those conversations get heated.
And in a world where so much content is forgettable, it's kind of refreshing to see a movie that sticks with you, you know?
Absolutely. It's a movie that demands your attention.
Okay, so much to unpack here, but we're running out of time for this segment. But don't worry, we'll be back soon with the final part of our deep dive into Joker. Folie Deux.
Until then, keep the conversation going. Head over to our website, leave a comment, and let us know what you thought of the film. What did you love? What did you hate? What left you confused?
We want to hear it all. Because the best deep dives are the ones that lead to even deeper conversations. So stay curious, everyone, and keep diving deep. So here we are, the final act of our Folie Deux deep dive.
It's kind of funny. We spent a lot of time, picking apart the movie's flaws, all the criticisms, the box office struggles.
Yeah, but even with all that, it's hard to deny that the film, left a mark. You know what I mean?
It definitely got people talking, debating, arguing, which in a world with so much content, so many movies, it's kind of impressive in itself. It wasn't just another forgettable superhero flick. It definitely got under people's skin. I think that speaks to how powerful the Joker myth is. It's a character that people just seem to connect with on a really deep level.
And I think it also shows that Todd Phillips and the whole team weren't afraid to take risks. They could have played it safe, given us a by-the-numbers sequel, but they went for something different.
They swung for the fences, for sure. And whether they hit a home run or struck out is really up to each person who watches it.
Exactly.
It just shows you that even with big stars and a good director, it doesn't always work.
It doesn't, no.
Sometimes movies just don't click.
They don't, and that's why it's here today, gone tomorrow.
Exactly.
Like, who knew this movie would disappear so fast?
It is really interesting.
It is.
Makes you think about other movies that did the same thing.
Yeah, like, what can we learn from that?
Exactly.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm Mike Leafa.
And I'm Lena Kefame.
And we'll catch you on the next Here, Today, Gone Tomorrow.